Representative Meghan Kilcoyne. Meg grew up in Sterling, Mass. and is a graduate of Wachusett Regional High School and Stonehill College. After graduating from Stonehill College with a BA in history, Meg began working in State Representative Harold Naughton's office. Starting in 2017, she entered the evening division at Suffolk University Law School. Meg worked with Representative Naughton since 2010. While working for Representative Naughton, she worked on a variety of issues impacting both the district and the Commonwealth. Serving as the representative's legislative director, she had been primarily responsible for crafting several major pieces of legislation that were signed into law, including the 2014 Historic Gun Reform Package and the 2018 Red Flag legislation, improvements and updates to statutes governing the National Guard, protections for female inmates, and updates to the law to ensure first responders receive critical care for traumatic stress. Throughout her years in the State House, Meg also worked with local officials and legislators of both parties to successfully shepherd through numerous local bills for each town in the district. She also served as Representative Naughton's chief budget analyst and worked with the representative to secure millions of dollars in funding for every town in the district, which went towards improving parks such as the Thayer Park in Lancaster, the Sterling Senior Center, transportation infrastructure in Boylston, and improvements to the community garden in Berlin. Meg also has a demonstrated record of collaborating with a diverse range of stakeholders and advocates to promote progressive and democratic priorities, such as protecting reproductive rights, supporting environmental justice, and combating climate change, expanding access to health care, and bolstering economic development to improve the lives of residents across the Commonwealth. BFFs, please join me in welcoming Representative Meghan Kilcoyne as our guest speaker.
Thank you, Pam. It's been a while since I've heard my whole biography right now. It's nice to kind of be reminded of all of those things. Hi, everybody. As Pam said, my name is Meghan Kilcoyne. I'm state representative for the 12th Worcester District, and that includes here in Boylston, this town, as well as the towns of Berlin, Clinton, Lancaster, Sterling, and a precinct in Northborough. I grew up in Sterling, and my family's from Clinton, and I also have family pretty much sprinkled throughout the rest of the area, including here in Boylston. So it's really been an honor and a lifetime that my career has been taking part and hopefully giving back to communities that raised me. But one thing I truly love doing is when I get to come into rooms like this one, a room that's full of women leaders, full of women who are doing the best they can to make it work, to succeeding in their chosen fields, and to really all of you and the work that you do making our community a better place to live. And I think one thing that I don't take for granted is it's not women, whether you're in business industry, whether you're in politics, government, or really healthcare, or any industry really, it's not the same experience as our male friends experience themselves. There's a lot of progress that has been made over the years, but I think all of us here know that there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think one thing I've learned in the past 3 years now that I've been in this position is just the way in which we still have to navigate so many uniqueness, the unique parts of what it means to be a woman in a leadership role. It's funny, actually, when I was walking in, Karen saw me coming and she said something to the effect of like, oh, I couldn't miss you with that blazer, it's so bright. And it got me thinking as I was walking in here, how I tend to wear a lot of brightly colored clothes in the last few years, but I never wore bright colored clothes before I got elected. My closet was just a lot of neutrals with an occasional jewel tone stuck in there. I really enjoyed wearing a lot of black. I still do, actually. I love a good, all black monochrome look. But it wasn't by accident that my wardrobe changed, because one thing I learned when I stepped into this position 3 years ago, and I'll go a little bit more into my background in a minute, but I think that all of us have to navigate this in our own way, is that I think when you're a woman, or at least in my experience, it's not necessarily always natural to want to stand to want to have all the center of attention on you. We know statistics show, in a boardroom, for instance, it's a lot harder for women to kind of stand up and say, this is what I think, or if they do, they're dismissed out of hand. So it was sort of not even a conscious thing, but I noticed that if I wanted to kind of make sure that I was being seen, whether it's an event or a photo or on the chamber, if I wear a brighter color, I'll force those eyes drawn to me, and it makes it a little easier to command the presence that it's not even that I want to, but that I have to. I have a responsibility to those I represent to be their voice and to stand out. And that, yes, it's kind of fun to do that in your wardrobe, but I think for all of us, I think that we all had to learn in one way or another how to make ourselves stand out and how to make our voice be heard, because it's really important. Because when those voices are silenced, it's missing out on, the world is missing out on the contributions that we have. So that little anecdote just kind of, I think, segues into maybe how I started on my journey to be where I am. And so I'll go backwards a little bit. As Pam said, I started working for Representative Carolyn in 2010. I just graduated college. We were 2 years out from the 2008 recession, which for many of you probably remember was a very difficult time for many. For those of us that were in college, I remember we were being told, there's no jobs out there for you, and grad school and law school are incredibly hard to get into. So if you don't have anything lined up, you're in big trouble. And so I took a paid internship with my local state rep. And I remember I had to write a letter to the secretary of, I think it was Environmental and Energy Affairs. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just wrote it the best way I could. And to my shock, the letter was pretty much not edited and then sent to the secretary. I remember thinking oh my God, I just wrote something. It didn't have my name attached to it, but I just wrote something that, a government official was going to read. And it was kind of my first taste into the ways in which government, you can impact change yourself. And I continued on in an internship. I was very lucky that at the end of that, I got hired in the actual paying position. And then throughout the years, I worked my way up to be legislative director for BFF Lunch at the time. So I got to work on a variety of local issues, on budget issues, and then statewide issues as well. And throughout that time, I got to learn the nuances of government, how to work with so many different stakeholders and a variety of people, and be able to be a part of policy making that was later signed into law. And it really did showcase the ways in which our government, whether it's municipal, state, or federal, has an impact on everyday lives of the people that of us, of our communities. It showed me what I could hopefully contribute to society. But even probably midway into that 10 years or so that I served in that role, I never imagined running for office. I never imagined being the one to step into those shoes. To me, that seemed like something that wasn't really attainable at my age, maybe somewhere down the line. But I sort of always saw myself as somewhat behind the scenes, being the one that could do all the research and write all the speeches, and not being the one that had that mouthpiece to be that loud voice. But one thing I started noticing is in the halls of the State House, there was a lot of women staffers like me. I don't know the statistics, but somewhere around 50-50 in terms of the staff that work there. But the people that are elected there are not exactly reflective of that 50-50 split that we see in our population. And as I became more aware of politics in general, both at the state and federal level, statistically, women represent on average about 30% of all state legislatures, and that includes U.S. Congress. I think it's actually a little lower for Congress. And so I used to think that's not right. That shouldn't be that case. There should be more women running for office. More women should do that. But I never really saw myself in that number. And I had my plan. I went to law school. I was studying law school at night, and I didn't really think too much about it until the representative I worked for Then I started thinking about it, and the wheels started turning, and I knew throughout the time that I had spent there, I had written budget items that got our district millions of dollars. I had helped write policy that was being touted nationally as leaders in the nation. Throughout my time, so looking back a little bit, I worked in the Public Safety Committee, and during that time, both in 2012 and 2018, there were mass shootings that precipitated a huge push for measures that for increased gun laws that would common sense gun safety. I don't say that to just put anybody in a position whether you're for or against gun violence or gun control laws. There was a huge push throughout the state, here included, that wanted to see to make sure their kids were safe. I kind of saw the rise of Moms Demand Action League, and it's something that didn't have much of a presence here when I started 10 years ago, that now really have a lot of members, both not just in our area, but across the state. Women-led voices that want to make sure that they don't have to worry about putting their kid on a school bus every day. In both of those instances, we passed laws that I think both make the state safer, and many other states are looking to emulate. But despite that experience, it wasn't until someone told me, I think you could do it, that I didn't start thinking about it seriously. And I was still terrified to run. I mean, when you run for public office, it's not necessarily about just doing what you have to do to run a campaign, whether that's knocking on doors or getting your name out there, putting out ads. It's about putting yourself out there for public scrutiny, and that really scared me at the time because I had never seen my name, other than when I played high school field hockey and we won a few playoff games. I had never seen my name in the paper before. I had never been put out there so complete strangers could comment on who I was as a person, whether or not I was any good. And so that was really terrifying to me. But I also understood, having worked in politics for that long, that if you don't take those opportunities when they come, they might never come again. Rob Naughton, who I served under, had been in office for 26 years by the time 2020 hit. He got elected in 1995. And he had a few people that challenged him, but he never really came close to losing that seat. And I knew that if I truly wanted to do this, if I truly thought I could do it, I had a duty to try to push myself there, because I knew that given everything that was going on, because my news is 2020, so this is all happening in the context of a global pandemic kind of coming down on us. I knew that of everybody that was thinking of running, I was the only one that understood how the State House worked. I was the only one that had worked on policy that had been signed into law, and I was the only one that really knew the communities that I wanted to serve. So I swallowed my fear as best I could, and filed the paperwork, and I got signatures, and I got on the ballot. And I ran in a 3-way primary in 2020, and I won that. And I was very excited to do that, to win. And then I went on to a general, but after I won the primary, I got a call from a reporter, and I thought it was about just talking about the race. And they called me and they said, if you win this, you'll be the first woman to ever represent this district. And I didn't know that at the time when she called. I knew that we hadn't had many women serve in legislatures across the nation, but I wasn't super aware of the individual data or the history of every district. And I remember thinking, just having this overwhelming thought of the weight of that, and how do you respond to that? How do you tell somebody what it feels to be told, oh, you're going to be the first woman to ever do this? So I don't even remember really what I said. I tried to just think of something that sounded, good enough for a newspaper, but also trying to not to recognize the enormity of what that meant. But there wasn't too much time to dwell on it because I hadn't won yet. And so then I did end up winning in November of 2020. And it was probably one of the, at least in my professional life, one of the most shocking, rewarding moments I can imagine. I mean, I said earlier, you never know what it feels like to put your name on the ballot. And those of you that have served municipal government understand this a little bit, because I honestly essentially asking people to trust you with a huge responsibility. And then beyond that, there's a little bit of it that's asking people to just kind of like you. So you feel like your entire character and personality and who you are as a person, what your principles are, what your values are up for just the entire public to kind of weigh in on. And so the fact that people actually believed enough to vote for me was so humbling. And I remember bracing myself, like that last 30 minutes before the polls closed, I remember trying to brace myself if it wasn't gonna go my way. I was like, well, it's worth it just to try. At least I tried. But but you just don't know what's gonna happen. So I was so grateful for that, and obviously, you can't do this alone. So, my win wasn't just my win, but it was my family that supported me, everybody that came out to help me. It was really, a collective victory. But then, when I got sworn in a few months later, the Women's Caucus kind of did this little event to welcome all the new women members that were in our class, quote unquote classes were called. We were called freshmen. We're called freshmen when we first come to the State House. So there's a little bit of hazing that goes on, but it's all in good fun. But for the freshmen women, when we were sworn in, there were about 6 of us all together that got elected out of 17 members that got elected in 2020. And we represented the highest number of women ever to be elected to the House of Representatives in the history of Massachusetts. And so I was told that my number, so we all were assigned a number, I was the 217th woman to be elected to the House of Representatives. And I'd like to ask this question because usually it's a little guessing game, but can anyone guess how many men have served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives? Call it a number.
400.
3,000.
4,000. Yeah. 20,000.
Who said 20,000?
No way.
That's it. Over 20,000 men have served in the history of Massachusetts in the House of Representatives.
You're next. It's gross. It's really gross.
It's insane, and even I didn't know that number, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I can't even do the math in my head in terms of what percentage of women make up that number. I think the first woman was elected in the early 1900s. She ran, I believe, for her deceased husband. So you saw that a lot, I think, in early American history. A lot of women got into politics because they were the widow of their husband that had passed. So they sort of were stepping in to fill his role. But I'm 217. I think we're now up to 230 something because we had more women elected this past year. But it's an astounding number. And obviously we still have a long way to go. But it really puts into focus that the progress that we've made is incredibly short in the grand scheme of things. Because, 50 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been possible for me to have a path to run. And then even beyond that, my grandmother actually was born in 1920. And she was born a month before the 19th Amendment was ratified in the United States. I mean, she was born into a world where, while they technically had ratified an amendment to the Constitution to give women the right to vote, she was born into a country where they legally still couldn't, because it hadn't gone into effect yet. So that's only 2 generations behind where we are now. And so I think that one thing that I quickly learned when I came to this role is I want to do what I can to clear the path behind me. Because the only reason I'm standing here is because of the women that cleared that way so I could have the opportunities that I have today. That goes for women that ran for office when no other women could, even when they were sworn or told that they couldn't do it. It's for the women in my family that didn't have nearly as many opportunities that I did. On my mom's side, I was the first woman to go to college. Neither my mother or my grandmother would have the same level of education I did, because at that time, it wasn't seen as something women had to do. You were going to get married and have kids, and that was your path. For many, many women, unless you were wealthy enough or, were able to go to school. And I think, I remember my other grandmother who did go to college on my dad's side, she said something when I was a kid once that, she went to college to find a husband, So this idea of women having, a role in the professional world outside the home, is relatively new. And I think that we're in a world today where women have opportunities that they didn't have before, but we're also trying to figure out how to juggle all of it. We just had a conversation at our table with where somebody said they want to be remembered for getting it done. I don't want to call anybody on this if they want to share it, but just talking about how we have to go succeed in the office, or the boardroom, or the state house. Women that choose to have children, still honestly take on a lot of that labor of childcare as well, or housework. Now, hopefully the hope is that everybody can have a partner that will share those burdens, but we saw during the pandemic that when workplaces were shut down, the labor of childcare oftentimes fell on them. We saw women's numbers in the workforce drop during that time. When I think about what I want to do and the policies I want to focus on, I think that one of the things we need to never forget is when we talk about these broader issues facing the Commonwealth is, what are we doing to help women? Where are we seeing women's roles or women's, whether it's driven by data or anecdotes, or like, what is the status of women right now, and how can we be more cognizant of that? I chose to serve on the board of the Women's Caucus in the legislature, so it's actually a bipartisan, bicameral caucus, so it's made up of senators and reps, Republicans and Democrats, and one of the things we talk about a lot is how to be the most effective we can, because we know that we want to be a force for change, and we want to be the force in the legislature that's reminding the rest of our colleagues, here's what we need to do to help women in this state. We work, there's a status in the Commission of Women, we try to work with them as well to try to get a sense of where we're seeing, issues that need to be worked on. So pandemic showed us that childcare is a huge issue. Childcare is incredibly expensive in this state. And unless we make that easier for families to afford, that's going to fall on the burden of the parents. And unfortunately, that will continue to fall on the shoulders of women and limit their opportunities to get into the workforce, to start a business, to do their dreams. So that's something that we've really tried to push this new session at the State House, and try to find ways in which we can push that policy. And I think that will be something, based on my conversations with leadership in the House, that we're going to take action on, I hope, this session. We also are looking at disparities in healthcare. Women, people have probably seen nationally maternal death rates are up in the United States compared to other countries that are similar to our socioeconomic status. Here in Massachusetts, we're seeing a growing issue where maternal health shelters are closing, including one close to our area up in Leominster. And we're also seeing that amongst Black women and women of color, health outcomes are far worse than their white counterparts. And just in general, women's healthcare is something that we have to make sure that we continue to fight for, because it is something that across the country we're seeing, the standard of care go down. And then finally, we talked about this a lot already, but how can we encourage more women to get into government roles? Because one thing that I think is so important is whether we live in this state or any other state or in this country, we want to look and see your representative government be reflective of who we are. And right now, unfortunately, we still have a long way to go, because as much as I love my male colleagues I serve, and they're great people, just when you look at the legislature, it is not 50-50 with men and women yet. And so I think until we get to that number, we still have to make sure that we're using the privilege that we have to open those doors for women behind us. And I think, I talked earlier when I first started this conversation with you all about being seen, and how that wasn't something I wanted to do before I got elected. And I kind of was a little facetious where I was like, yeah, I stand out on the photo, so I'm wearing a bright blazer. But one thing I learned that I didn't really think too much about when I was running is that just being visible does matter a lot. And I know that I can see that, especially when I see young girls, and whether some as young as 10, some in high school, who remind me that seeing someone that they can relate to, or or they can see some of themselves in helps them realize that this could be a door for them if they want. This could be a path they can choose. That's a lot harder for young women to envision if they're looking at something where it's a sea of men that don't look like them, that don't share their experiences. So I try to remember that when, when I'm doing my job, or even when I'm not. One thing as an elected official you always have a responsibility for is that you're always carrying that weight of the district with you, no matter where you are. So I always try to remember that no matter where I am. And I try to take that responsibility as seriously as I can. And when I was asked, what do you want to be remembered for in our little table breakout session, I said, I just want to be remembered for having made a positive impact. And it's kind of vague and kind of broad, but one thing I've learned is when you're trying to make change, when you're trying to make, whether it's your district or your state or your country a better place, it's going to be a lot of stops and starts. And a lot of this work is a marathon and not a sprint. And I know for me, it's you have to balance that energy of pushing, but also looking around you and taking stock as to where everything is and realizing that not everything's going to happen tomorrow. And sometimes the seeds that we plant aren't going to come to fruition until many, many years down the road, and maybe after we're gone. And so I hope that, I'm still early in my career as a state representative, but I hope whatever this ends, and hopefully it'll end on my terms, because in this job you do have to earn the people's votes every 2 years. But I hope that the work that I've done and will do some good in this world. And I hope that, one thing that I can inspire is that the women that come behind me have a little bit of an easier time than I did, because I am here because of the paths that were forged for me. But each and every one of you are forging those paths too. Whether you're an attorney, which I met several attorneys today. I went to law school, and trust me, I'm not a practicing attorney, but there is definitely gender, culture disparities in that field as well. Whether you're starting a business, it is a lot harder for women-owned businesses to get their feet under them, to start and to thrive. Or whether you're working in a banking industry or a financial institution. I'm sure I'm forgetting healthcare. I'm sure I'm forgetting some that I saw that all of you are forging paths for women behind you. And no matter what industry you're in, there will be young girls and young women that will have opportunities just because of the work you're doing. So you may not actively be necessarily, trying to think of ways that you can help others, but just by being there, by doing the work that you do every single day, will make that easier for somebody behind you. And so that's why I was so excited to be here today and have lunch with you and have an opportunity to share a little bit of my story, because if it's one thing I've learned, women have to stick together and support each other. And when we do that, we are going to succeed in our whatever field we choose. So to that, I think I will open it up for questions, right? We're doing a little Q&A?
And I got one for you.
Oh, fantastic.
Mick, when you and I chatted, we talked about when you were running for office, you were knocking on doors, what the experience was for you
Oh, yeah.
to when nail counts. What kind of questions did you get?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So I touched on this a little bit, but I think, one thing I experienced when I ran is it is a lot different when you're running as a woman. And there are things that I didn't even think of until I was actually doing it. One thing I remember before I started knocking on doors safely, we were in the pandemic, so I did wear a mask, but I remember asking her about it, and I was like, so what do I wear? Like, do I wear a professional, like a suit? It's also summer, so it's kind of hot. Like, what is kind of a fashion situation here? Because I am always thinking about how I present myself, as many of us are. And that, I think, means a lot different for men, because the response was like, oh, I usually just wear khakis and golf shirt. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's not gonna work for me. So I'm not gonna do that. So I figured out kind of how to dress myself. I usually wear, especially when it's hot, I wear like a skirt and like a little blouse. The way I try to present myself is my sister's a teacher, and so she's always dressed in a very kind of welcoming way, but very almost safe way. She's not too trendy in the classroom. She expresses herself, but always in a way that she's going to be approachable. So that was kind of thinking of things that men I don't think have to think about. They can do in uniform. We have to think of what message are we sending? What are we conveying to people? And then when I was out on doors, I would get sometimes a question as to, okay, well, how many kids do you have? Do you have kids? Are you married? And I was kind of taken aback because it wasn't something that I anticipated getting. I always thought, like, oh, we'll talk about policy. I don't want to know about my experience. And I'd kind of be like, oh, no, I don't have kids. And the responses sometimes were even weirder because I remember one person that asked me that, I was like, oh, good. It's good you don't have kids. You have more time to do the work for us then. And I was like, oh, okay. Have a nice day. And I went on my way and I was walking away. And I remember thinking, like, just being really uncomfortable because I don't currently have kids, but I'm in my 30s. That will likely be a decision I'll be making in the next few years. And I remember thinking, like, well, what if I want to have kids? Like, what if I had kids? Why would that matter in terms of whether or not I was fit to do this work? You know, and plenty of my male colleagues have kids, many of whom that are about my age that are having babies right now, and I guarantee you, because I know this because I've asked, they've never been asked, so what is your child situation? Do you have kids? No? Oh, you do? Never mind, I'm not going to go for you. And in fact, most of them put it on their campaign list with them holding the babies and showing that they're a family man. So those are kinds of the weird, I think, gender politics that I experienced when I was running that. There's certain attitudes that people still have about women with kids in professional settings, and again, kind of like having a weird commentary on your personal life is something that I think that men running don't always have to experience in the same way. But yeah, so that was one thing I saw campaigning that was quite different that I think I know we're not didn't have to worry about that question or what he was wearing.
Anybody else have questions? Okay.
Do you have any kind of specific schooling background, or can anybody just run as a rep?
Oh my gosh, anybody.
Okay.
And so, it's so interesting, like looking at the backgrounds of people that I serve with. So mine primarily was in the State House. So I had a staff experience. I had a bit of I went to law school, although I wasn't done by the time I ran, so I had like a law degree. And then, you know, I majored in history. I was interested in reading and writing, and those were things I was good at, which made me a good staffer. But that also helped, I think, hone my communication skills a little bit too. That said, people bring their life experiences to this work. So mine was sort of more like jack of all trades, right? I was able to tell people that I understood how the building worked, and then I would be able to get things done, and that resonated with people. But there's people that I know that were nurses that you know, came from a nursing background that way, or came from a healthcare background. A lot of people that had, you know, education background, or served on school committee. There's people that were like practicing laws. There's people that own their own businesses or had owned their own businesses and been entrepreneurs. One of the men that got elected with me was a former boxer. So that's one of the more unique ones that usually raise some eyebrows. But he's a great legislator. I mean, you can have any different background to run. I think it's about being able to, you know, I think sometimes when you have a specific background in like one area, that might be a big issue that you're running on, right? But you also have to be able to, as long as you can listen to people, as long as you can work with others, and as long as you understand how to translate whatever your experience is to work on policy issues and listening to constituents, it doesn't matter what your background is. It matters if you care and you want to make a difference and you want to do this work. Yes?
Thanks for being here, Meg. My question is, you know, when local people have an idea, they want to perhaps move some important issue forward, and of course, you know, it's important to know your representatives and the state senator. But like, what happens once a local idea bubbles up? How does that really like move forward at the state house?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, when you're talking about policy making, getting that bubbling up is sort of the biggest part of the role. Because when we get in, especially any big policy, you know, it's one thing to get your local state rep and state senator on board, but then the work becomes getting the rest of the membership on board, because you can't pass anything unless you're getting support from your colleagues. Because ultimately, in order to get something signed into a law and on the governor's desk, it needs to pass the House and it needs to pass the Senate, and then not only does it have to pass both chambers, but they have to you know, many of us have very different districts. So despite being in the same party, we are probably fighting for different issues, or our communities are not facing the same challenges, you know, out here than say Cambridge or Boston or Somerville. So I think, you know, when we're talking about moving things forward, it's so important to talk to your local state rep and your local state senator, and then also figuring out who the other key people are. So like, you know, maybe you have a bill that was assigned to a certain committee. The first step in getting a bill forward is to get it out of that committee. So you're going to want to talk to the members and educate them on the issues. You know, you're going to want to make sure your state rep and state senators are, you know, also doing that work too, of talking to their colleagues and showing their support. But you have to have something kind of bubble up to the top, I think. Like a lot of the things that you see come to the floor, we don't have a ton of close votes in the state, but that's in part that because we've done a lot of work at the front end to make sure that we are talking to our colleagues, that we're hearing concerns that maybe, you know, Western Mass reps are bringing up, or the Cape reps are bringing up, and addressing those in an effective way. So by the time we're voting on something, that bubbling up portion has effectively happened. And it's so we can hopefully get the best bills hopefully that we can, and that we're careful on really crafting something that's going to be an effective policy across the state and do what it was intended to do, no matter what subject matter it is. Does that make sense? Okay. I want to, when I get into the weeds and stuff, I always want to make sure that I'm clear, because sometimes I don't want to be like too insidery on stuff either. So if I say terminology that people don't know, just come on and ask me. So.
No, that's great. I'll just say, you know, I wonder how young people, like kids, I feel like we'd be really effective explaining and showing kids across the Commonwealth like, how do things get done in the state. I feel like you're very approachable.
Well, we have some 8th grade classes coming in the next couple of weeks, which are always fun. So we do try to show them like they can also make a difference. I had one class coming once, and it was so funny because I brought them in the chamber, and we were in what they call informal session, and so that's when we pass kind of non-controversial stuff. If anyone votes against it, it can come through, but you can get, you know, local bills done and things like that. So they're in the chamber, and I was on the roster, which is like this big. If you go to the chamber, it's like the big thing where you speak from. It's kind of raised dais that you can speak from. So I said to the kids, well, I just want everyone to know on this day that it will be recorded. The Boyles Tonto Middle School 8th grade class was here, and that will forever be recorded on this day for all of history. And then it just broke out into cheers. I'm like, oh good, they thought that's cool. So it was a fun day. So that mattered to them. Yeah, I think showing young people that the government is for them, that people will listen to them is really important. And so I always love trying to be involved in that and working with the teachers to be as accessible as possible. And I know you have a question too.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering what your aspirations are for the future.
So I am very happy where I am now. I think for, you know, the immediate future is, you know, getting bills, doing what I can this session to get done policy that's going to best serve our district. I think I filed around 30 bills this session or so. So immediate future is doing what I can to move that forward. I think that experience is very important. I'm still very early in my career as a state rep. I kind of was joking earlier that our first term we're called freshmen, but it is true. You know, we're very young in our careers. We have a lot to learn. And even somebody like me that had 10 years of state house experience, I still have a lot to learn how to get things done. And so I hope at least, you know, in the next 5 years, if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected to, you know, a term after this, or continue to be reelected, to use the experience and knowledge that I gained to be more effective. I think, you know, one thing that's been really beneficial for me is that there's been a lot of members who have that seniority that have been around longer than me, that are holding, you know, helping hand out to some younger and newer members to kind of show them the ropes, to be mentors, to guide people. And so I think that, you know, if I'm fortunate enough to serve this role longer, I hope to use that experience both to benefit my district and to be a more effective legislator and, you know, help newer members kind of figure out what, you know, what I know as well. Yeah. Any other questions?
Let's give Representative